Hello, and very warm welcome to the next episode of the IGRec Talks. We meet regularly with political scientists, with philosophers, with sociologists to talk about recent developments in the global security situation. We speak about our vision for the new global security infrastructure. We're trying to analyze what's currently happening, and we're also trying to dream big and express our ideas for the future system. In our today's conversation, I would like to welcome two speakers. Michelle Murray, Associate Professor of Politics and Associate Dean of the College for International Study at Bard College. Michelle, very warm welcome.
Thank you.
And we also have Evgeny Roshchin, who is a fellow at the Center for European Policy Analysis and a visiting fellow at Johns Hopkins University School of Advanced International Studies. And a very warm welcome to you as well, Evgeny.
Hi, Angelina. Thank you for having me.
And my name is Angelina Davydova. I'm a fellow at the Institute for Global Reconstitution. And this is a think tank, or sometimes we actually don't like the word think tank, and we use the word like the Denkfabrik in German, which means the factory of thoughts. So we're the factory of thoughts, which was created in Berlin 1.5 years ago. And its core researchers, political scientists, philosophers, journalists, environmental experts, originally from Russia, now being based elsewhere. We do research, we do public events, we do research conferences, we work with students within Russia, outside of Russia, with international students, and we also do events like this, the IGRec Talks, where we are trying to popularize the latest thoughts on various international issues, including international security issues. And this is once again the topic of our today's discussion. So my first question to both of you, and maybe I'll address my first question to Michelle, is where are we now? What's happening? In which terms would you describe the current situation, the current security situation in the world?
So the way that I think about our current moment is, if I were to choose one word, it would be unraveling. So there is this robust architecture or structure that was put into place after the Second World War, institutions, norms against territorial aggression, human rights, et cetera, et cetera. And I think what we've seen really in haste over the last 4 or 5 years, but really starting before then, was a kind of slow unraveling of those norms and institutions. And so we see things like the Russian invasion of Ukraine as a violation of territorial sovereignty. You see the targeting of civilians in places like Ukraine, in Gaza, and elsewhere. And so I think we're in this moment of, I don't want to use the word transformation because that suggests something positive, kind of de-evolution away from the norms and rules that have provided a tremendous amount of stability for 70 years in the international system.
Sounds like very turbulent times indeed. Evgeny,
Yeah.
and what's your take on that?
I think my take would be fairly similar. I tend to think of this moment as a critical juncture. It might have the elements of unraveling, particularly in the domain of security, which we are discussing today. And that's because indeed the security provision structures such as United Nations Security Council are basically held ineffective due to veto powers that the major players in the system have. And of course, I connect the origin of the current problems in this critical moment of 2022 and Russia using its veto power. So since then, it was evident to everyone that the previous security architecture is basically gone because the major powers that were endowed with this authority to preserve peace, in fact, it was their responsibility, are now using their exclusive status in the system to prevent that function from being realized, right? Um, but what does it tell us about security itself? Is it gone for good or not? It looks like it's not. It's just that we are seeing that the previous security structures are being replaced by some familiar forms from the past. Well, first of all, it's a principle of self-help. Countries looking at this situation are learning that it's now up to them to provide for their own security. So this one basic principle is coming to the fore. Another one that is emerging from this unraveling of the security structures is a desire to find a patron when it comes to second-tier powers. Using the power of the patrons such as China, Russia, or the United States, for that matter, can in fact offer you some degree of security, especially the security from international pressure. So that said, I would say that there is an enormous and profound understanding that security matters and that we need to invest into the proper and efficient instruments of security. It's just that there is also an understanding that the previous security systems, as we knew it, are no longer effective. At the same time, I would say it's too early to bury the entire United Nations structure under, the ashes of what's going on at the moment. It looks like most major players, particularly the permanent five, are all committed to the United Nations system. No one at this point, as opposed to, for instance, one point in history when they pronounced the League is dead, no one is currently pronouncing that the United Nations is dead, right? It's quite the opposite. China strongly commits to the United Nations structure. Even Russia, unhappy with the world public opinion about what it's doing in Ukraine, still sticks to the United Nations and holds to its permanent seat on the Security Council. And that's the reason I call it a critical juncture. So it looks like there is unraveling, but this unraveling is taking place within the institutional structure or our ideas about the institutional structure, that we inherit from World War II moment. That is why I see it as both a moment of crisis as well as, a moment for an opportunity for the future.
Well, maybe building up on that, and since you also mentioned UN quite a lot, saying that even though quite a few voices keep saying the UN is in crisis as well, but then, as you mentioned, that the five largest UN players are still trying to respect it, at least in words. So do you think a UN reform is likely to happen? Do you think it's needed? Also, maybe in view of the US withdrawing a lot of financial resources behind many UN agencies?
Is it the question to me?
Yeah, I think first to you and then to Michelle. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks for that. Yeah, I think this is a fundamental question, and it's been in the air for quite some time, unrelatedly to the crisis that we observe at the moment, or have been observing since 2022. This issue of UN reform has been discussed within the United Nations, and I'm quite certain the issue will be raised again fairly soon when the United Nations General Assembly will gather later this month in New York. There is currently even a project on the United Nations agenda called the Pact for the Future, which involves the issues of UN reform. I think previously I would have been skeptical about the prospects for the United Nations reform, simply because it is in its constitutional structure that makes it really impossible to reform the organization, because the permanent five have to agree to the reform. They still hold the veto power, and I don't seem to uh, feel that there is a consensus among the five that we need the reform, and we are in agreement about the trajectory of this reform. Even Russia and China hold different positions on the issue of the reform. Russia, for instance, while verbally expressing its consent to the whole idea of the United Nations reform, objects to concrete proposals put forward in the United Nations. That very Pact for the Future, which I've just mentioned, is strongly objected to by Russia. Russia thinks it is a conspiracy of the Western powers, that pressurize the global South. While China, quite the opposite, endorses the proposal. But it is in disagreement with Russia, for instance, as to the way we should reform the Security Council. Everyone agrees that it should be extended, like expanded, and new members should be brought into the conversation, given permanent seats, so that the representation of the global South would be fairer. But there is a fundamental disagreement as to who exactly should represent that very global South. And I don't think there is an agreement in sight as to the membership. And I'm sure it will be the key obstacle to the reform of the Security Council. But at the same time, looking at how things unfold, particularly in the context of the current crisis in the security architecture, I tend to think that the times tend to accelerate. And what seemed impossible just yesterday might become literally possible tomorrow, depending on what happens on the ground. For instance, something changes in the current war between Russia and Ukraine. Something that we wouldn't have thought about just yesterday, which would just overturn, the trajectory of events. That could also trigger the change of attitudes to the global security architecture, and things could be set in motion as far as the reform is concerned. So, again, going back to your original question, if you asked me about that in 2022, I would have said, well, probably not in the near future. Now, I wouldn't be so certain. It could take decades to discuss the reform, but it could also happen relatively quickly should something else occur in the current stream of events.
Michelle, and what's your take on the possible UN reform?
No, I largely agree. I mean, I think UN Security Council reform has always been a kind of two-level game, right? There's what's happening in the general, it's the question of composition, right? So who will be these new members of the UN Security Council? And then, of course, what would that mean? Is it just a permanent membership? Is it permanent membership with a veto, right? All of those details matter considerably, but there's also a lot of jockeying that goes on in terms of who exactly would get those memberships. And I think that question is a first order question, right? So who will these new members be? Will the great powers, the P5, accept those members, but also will other states in the system, right, the non-great powers, accept those members, right? So, will Pakistan feel good with India having a permanent seat? Will Japan feel good with South Korea having a permanent seat? So I think there's a lot of dynamics at play, and there's a sense in which I think the great powers the P5 can say, oh, sure, we think there should be reform, because they know that those questions are so contentious that it's never actually going to come to fruition. But I also agree, yes, like this is a moment for the possibility of reform. I think that if you think about the UN, right, it was born out of the crisis of the Second World War and the pledge or the commitment that we do not want great power war like what happened in Europe to happen again. And in that respect, right, the UN has been incredibly successful. We have not had great power war of that scale. Of course, we had the gridlock of the Cold War that the UN sort of facilitated in many ways, right? US would veto things that helped the Soviet Union would veto things that, the US wanted, et cetera. So it sort of preserved that sense of balance. Since the end of the Cold War, again, another moment where the architecture changed, right, or the system changed. I think we've been, on this 35-year trajectory of sort of figuring this out. And I think one of the things that the current moment potentially enables is, okay, this old system isn't working the way that it worked in the past, right? It is of what I always tell my students, that the current UN system is in some ways of another time. It's not that it's not valuable, it's not that it's not needed, but it is designed for a different problem than we face now. The question is, I think, is the way that institution designed, right? So the institutional structure, the constitutional structure of the UN, does that prevent change? That's the question that I'm grappling with and struggling with, in which I don't entirely know the answer to. So there could be a ton of clear-eyed, acknowledgement that change is needed, that this isn't working, that we need new members, et cetera, et cetera. But if the structures itself, which are designed to prevent change in some real kind of serious way, don't allow that, then I fear that we could be stuck. And if we're stuck, then I think the pessimistic read is that the UN could become increasingly obsolete, just because it's kind of stuck in another time. So for me, really, the question is, what are the political conditions that would enable rethinking, a UN for the 21st century? And maybe that is some kind of global event that really kind of shocks us into clarity about the structures we need, in the same way that the Second World War did that, right? It was a terrible tragedy that provided the political will to do something. And so hopefully we don't see anything of that scale, but what would it take to build that political consensus is the question that I wrestle with.
And Michelle, do you see the decline in financing of a number of UN agencies, also from the side of the US, as additional threat?
I mean, I think that there is the big questions of peace and security and what happens in the UN Security Council. And then there is the whole wide array of things that the UN does that really matter to people's lives. And I think that's the kind of, in some ways, the invisible side of the UN, right? The programs, food aid, various kinds of things, various dimensions of the UN that isn't the kind of sexy general or sexy UN Security Council debates or whatever that often dominate the news. Yeah, I mean that pulls the UN out of people's lives, right? And while maybe here in the United States where I am, the UN doesn't have a day-to-day presence in our lives, it is a day-to-day presence, a life-saving, critical presence in the lives of lots and lots, millions and millions of people in the world. And so I do think that this threatens this kind of core aspect of what the UN does. The question I have is, will other sources of funding emerge, right? Philanthropy, this could also provoke a rethinking of how we think about providing this support to people truly in need in the world.
Right. Yeah, I'm taking part in the UN climate negotiations and the UNFCCC, and the withdrawal of the US, well, from the Paris Agreement and also from supporting financially the work of the UNFCCC would have meant a cut in budget of about 20%. But for this year, next year at least, it has been covered by the Bloomberg Foundation. So Michael Bloomberg. So we'll see how the situation will be developing. And but yeah, this is obviously a very interesting question. So maybe to pick up on what you were saying last, Michelle, so we were talking a lot about the reform of the UN system, and we were making a lot of references to the ongoing wars and military conflicts in the world. And obviously, like the big news of the last few months was the attempt of the new US administration to actually stop the two conflicts, the two wars, like Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the Gaza war, the Gaza conflict. And we are now speaking in early September, and it still hasn't worked out. So do you think it's like it failed, or do you think it's, it's not working for obvious reasons, and we're still to await a positive response, a positive set of events happening in the next few months with regard to these two wars?
So I think that these are two extremely challenging problems. If we think about Israel and Gaza, if we think about Russia in Ukraine, when Russia invaded Ukraine and there was no consequence for that, really, I think that made it difficult to find a solution to this problem that would work, because it's very unclear to me that anyone is willing, especially the United States, to pay the costs of making this a even costlier intervention or war than it has been for Russia. So on the one hand, I think I never expected Donald Trump and his administration to solve this problem, because it is a challenging problem. The prior administration did not solve this problem. And so I had no belief that Donald Trump as a deal maker would somehow be able to solve this problem. I guess, on the other hand, I don't think that Donald Trump has a very robust notion of politics. He thinks that he can kind of muscle his way into solutions, which is just simply not how these kinds of challenging conflicts get solved, right? He's not going to enter the room with a bunch of kind of fanfare and just say, this is what I want. It's not American domestic politics, basically, right? So on the one hand, I had no expectation that he would solve it. On the other hand, he hasn't solved it, and I don't think he will solve it, because I just simply don't think he understands what diplomacy is and what diplomacy requires. I'll also say that Donald Trump's
admiration of authoritarian leaders makes this even more challenging because I think he finds camaraderie, he finds them attractive. And so, even beyond the kind of gossipy stories of Putin and Trump and whatnot, I think, there's something very appealing to Donald Trump in Vladimir Putin, as there is in, any number of strongmen across the world, right? This has been a characteristic of his foreign policy in the first term. It is a characteristic of his foreign policy in his second term, which is to cozy up to authoritarians and to um, back away from democratic allies. And that makes this problem harder because what we need is a strong united front with Europe. We need a strong NATO, and his actions on these questions kind of undermine the credibility of those commitments, I think. No one knows if the United States is committed to Europe. And in that war, if push came to shove, is the United States committed to Europe? Nobody knows. And so I think it makes it hard to negotiate a solution, right? What interest does anyone, certainly Putin, have in solving this? Or if it is solved, it will be solved on his terms, which I think very few people and countries are going to accept. So, long and short of it, a hard problem. He has not solved it and he will not solve it.
Evgeny, what do you think about the peacemaking efforts of the new U.S. administration?
Right. I would agree. It's a difficult one. What I would just say that it's probably that the process is not complete yet. It might be that the new administration just overestimated its ability to broker peace in this regard. If they really hope to get it done in a day, well, whatever they meant by the day, like a month or two, they certainly overestimated that ability. But it looks like they adjusted their approach to the conflict and probably are ready to get it as much time as it needs. So therefore, I would say that we might be seeing this so-called negotiation process for quite some time more. And it might not end tomorrow. It might end in a year from now. But it will still be the result of an ongoing negotiation process. So that's how I view it. It's certain to me that President Trump did try to reset the entire stage, right? He definitely didn't want to pursue the same strategy as the previous administration. I don't know for what reason. He might have understood that it might be too difficult to manage the escalation ladder, which all involved countries gradually climbed upon. So it's risky and it's costly. And I agree with Michelle that President Trump, by all means, wanted to get rid of the cost issue. And that's important for his constituency as well, because this is the campaign he ran on. But at the moment, we are in a bifurcation moment. It does look important for President Trump that authoritarian leaders show respect to him, recognize his authority. And this is the kind of terms that he would accept in dealing with leaders like Kim Jong-un or Putin. However, there is a limit, so it seems, or extent to which they can show that respect credibly. because it needs to be translated into action at some point. And at the moment, it looks like President Trump is in a difficult situation because it's obvious to everyone that while Putin is, you know, paying this respect in public, like verbally, he doesn't want to translate that respect into action. Like he doesn't reciprocate the effort. Like just look at how many times President Trump, reiterated that he wants this war to stop and he wants Putin to take action, and there was no action, only the acceleration of attacks. So President Trump might decide at some point that the kind of respect Putin shows to him is not the kind of respect he expected from President Putin. Would that mean an end to negotiation process? I don't think so. I don't think so. Because I think there is an understanding in the current administration that they need to stick to the strategy they chose, try and negotiate with Putin and not falling back into the strategy of the previous administration. And that's why his efforts to exert pressure would be carefully calibrated. I anticipate a new wave of sanctions, but I would also anticipate that they would be carefully framed, as a friendly gesture or, as attempt to broker peace, rather than an attempt to penalize Putin for his misbehavior. So this is what I'll be expecting in the next weeks and months. President Trump gradually picking up some of the tools from the toolbox of the previous administration, but at the same time trying to stick to his chosen strategy of being able to talk to Vladimir Putin. To wrap it up, I don't think the process is over yet, despite the lack of success at this stage. So there is a lot more for us to see ahead.
Thank you, Evgeny. Michelle, I think you mentioned that now we're not even sure, we cannot even say certainly that the new US administration is standing by European partners. But do you see European Union as an increasingly independent political center? How do you see the future of European Union as a global player in the whole security debate?
I mean, I think that you've seen certainly developments in places like Germany, right, where there have been bigger discussions about contributions to defense, and thinking about what a Europe independent of the United States in terms of a security policy might look like. I think it depends on the nature of the existential threat. So the more threatened Europe feels by Russia, so let's say the war in Ukraine escalates. I know, right, just the other day, Poland shot down Russian drones on Polish territory. Now we're talking about NATO allies. I think, there is this kind of delicate dance between the escalation of the conflict in Ukraine outside of the borders of Ukraine and what that would mean then for, NATO allies that have an Article 5 guarantee. So I would expect it to sort of, I don't think that this is in and of itself going to solve kind of all of Europe's problems in terms of coordination and um, the idea that Europe will be a kind of major great power as the European Union. I don't think I foresee that sort of integration, but I do wonder if there will be more, or I would expect as Europeans feel more existentially threatened by Russia, that they will start to, the kind of self-help world means that you have to provide for your own security. And so the US has been providing a lot of security for Europe for a long time. And so what that looks like, I'm not entirely sure. But I do think that as the kind of threat becomes more crystallized, as it feels more urgent, without a kind of really forceful commitment from the United States to maintain those guarantees, I would fully expect European countries, in unison or as individual actors, to start to think about their own security and providing for it themselves.
Evgeny, and what do you think about the future of European Union from political and security point of view?
I think it's a really big moment for the European Union. Um, and it's big in all kinds of respects. It's a moment where they need to decide about the nature of their relationship with the United States. So they will be talking a lot, I would assume, in the next year about the nature of transatlantic relations. And militarily and defense-wise, it's also a big moment, given the pledge that they made to increase their defense spending. It's a significant increase, which might involve a significant transformation of military infrastructure. If it was not for the war that Russia wages against Ukraine, I think what happened at the last NATO summit would have had very different consequences for the transatlantic relations. So if it were to be in a different context, in which we would have strong pressure from the United States on the European Union, the kind of criticism that Vice President J.D. Vance voiced for the state of liberty within the European Union, I'm sure we would have seen an attempt to decouple in terms of security provision. However, Russia's invasion of Ukraine is really a game changer in this setting, which makes it difficult for the European Union to really decouple from the United States at this vantage point. Because at the moment, if the European Union were left face to face with Russia, it would have found itself very vulnerable to this military threat in terms of its capabilities in the first place. Because they do need the United States to provide for nuclear protection. The nuclear powers in Europe are not yet capable to provide the same kind of protection. Therefore, it's really curious to track what we might, be having in relations between the United States and the European Union. I do anticipate that the investment in infrastructure into new factories that could produce, for instance, more shells, more drones, more everything, would increase the European Union capabilities. But it would take a few years from this moment on, say 5, 10 years, before the European Union will be able to protect itself independently from the United States. That said, I would say it's a matter of tracking the process at this very time, because it seems that the pledge the European countries made at the summit really satisfied President Trump. And I don't think it's on his agenda anymore to decouple from the European Union. The United States might still stay longer, at least until the end of the current president's term, and then we'll have to see. But it's not just about this president. all the presidents before Donald Trump emphasized that problem of European underspending. And it was an intention of the United States for a long time to reduce its spending on European security. So, in a way, it's not a surprise. And the European Union, if it wanted to stay independent and safe, was bound to actually do what they do now. It's just that it took them a while to realize that. Uh, so, how should I conclude? I don't think we will be seeing like the withdrawal of U.S. Nuclear guarantees from the European Union. But I would also expect the European Union to take a stronger role as far as conventional security is concerned, which would provide ground for future decoupling if any decoupling is to take place at all. It might be that future administrations will be content with, the new distribution of costs when it comes to providing for transatlantic security. Because after all, strategically, it's not in the U.S. best interest to give up on its strongest ally. Because in the world, what we are seeing is the emergence of regional security organizations. And you really have to have allies here and there to be able to balance those.
Now, traveling from European Union to other parts of the world, in the last 2 months, we saw two wars which took just a few days. I speak here about the Iran-Israeli war and then also India-Pakistan war. What does it say us about the new global security? Like what kind of experience can we get from these two military conflicts or wars, like whatever we call them? Michelle?
I mean, I think in the case of Israel and Iran, I think that was largely symbolic. I think that was driven by Israeli domestic politics. I think it was perhaps meant to be an escalation, try to escalate up to draw the United States in more forcefully into the region. I think the fact that the United States did participate, but didn't escalate it further, I think was a good sign that there was sound strategic thinking happening within this administration. But it's not surprising to me that we see these incursions happening in very many places around the world, because I do think some of these norms are under contestation right now, or it's not clear what the strength of these norms are. And so, escalating up when you can to get what you want seems to it's kind of testing the system, basically. So how much will these norms hold? But the fact that the conflicts were resolved quickly, I think speaks to the strength of our commitment to territorial integrity, and that there is something important there, right? That in both cases, I mean, with India, Pakistan, obviously two nuclear powers, there was this looming question of escalation, which I think is important to recognize, and it's good that they were able to de-escalate that. In the case of Iran and Israel, again, I think that was more driven by Netanyahu's own predicaments and what he's aiming to do in a broader kind of security context. But I think it is in some ways heartening that they didn't escalate, that they remained small and they resolved quickly. So I think there was, again, those are those moments of crisis where you see the system kind of snapping back into action to kind of pull things back. And we saw and Donald Trump acted in both cases to try to resolve those conflicts.
Right. Evgeny?
Yeah, I think, Angelina, besides the conflicts you mentioned, one could also recall the Armenia-Azerbaijan war, uh, Cambodia, Thailand border conflict, and a few others. All of them were relatively quick, quite dramatic in terms of possible escalation, but quickly resolved. And I think countries are learning grim lessons from this situation, and the lessons are related to what I tried to describe as a critical juncture in the beginning of our conversation. It seems that United Nations member states realize that the security system, as we knew it, is now suspended. And in this moment, you can indeed test norms in a way you wouldn't do before. And there are lessons from this process. And I think the first lesson that countries learned from a bunch of these regional wars is security is an increasingly self-help problem. I think what countries are learning is that they need to arm because no one out there will come to their help. Uh, so that's the lesson that could lead us to the increasing armament race. Second of all, you have to be quick, which might increase countries' resolve when it comes to contentious issues. They realize that in the current moment, it will take a while for the so-called international community to come together to deliberate and then to decide on the course of action. That might take, you know, weeks, if not months. And this is the window of opportunity. If you're armed enough and if you're seeing that your neighbor is not prepared for the conflict, it's an opportunity for you to act and to do it quickly. So that's another green question. A third one, but related, is that countries also learned it's important to build or to plug into a sort of patron-client relations. So it's a way to hedge one's own risks. Given the disarray in which the Security Council is in, countries on all continents realize that it's important to have at least one of the permanent five on their side, either China or Russia. And it doesn't take much actually to get it on their side. It only, requires a friendly attitude or, the articulation of some sort of respect to the strengths of the leadership that China or Russia, for instance, could offer. And then you'll be protected by, those who hold permanent seats during deliberations. They can always use delay tactics or veto resolutions. And this is the negative aspect of the critical juncture we are talking about. At the same time, and I would totally agree with Michelle here, the eagerness to resolve conflicts quickly does indicate that countries seem to commit to underlying foundational principles such as sovereignty and territorial integrity. They could contest, indeed, some of the regions, but after the period of active contest, they would settle on the idea that, well, okay, we'll leave it here. Now, from this moment on, you are a sovereign nation, and we agree with your territorial integrity. Wrapping up, I would say, despite the grim lessons that would perhaps please the realist interpretation of world politics. It looks like there are still some constraints, ideational constraints, that indicate countries' commitments to internationalism and institutionalism.
I think, Evgeny, this also, like your last point, also refers to what you were talking about earlier when we were speaking about the UN reform. And you said that even though, there are a lot of calls for the UN to be reformed, and there's a lot of concerns about how inefficient the UN is, like the big five, at least, still seem to be having quite a lot of respect for quite a number of the basic UN principles. And I think what you were saying just now is like one of your latest arguments is basically also was reflecting this, maybe from a slightly different perspective. My final question to you is about your dreams. It's about your dreams, your hopes, your vision. If you were to dream about the new global security architecture, the one that would make you happy, you as researchers, as political scientists, as someone who thinks about it, analyzes it, and probably imagines a better world, what would that system be? What is your vision? What could work in current conditions? And what is also realistic?
I do think it's an important caveat to try to think realistically and taking into account the current context. In the short term, I would be prepared to see more of the so-called coalitions of the willing emerging. We have an example now among the European Union members and their allies, a coalition of the willing to continue supporting Ukraine in its current defense against Russia's invasion. But I worry this will not be the only instance of this kind of proactive regional cooperation effort. We recently saw the so-called Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit in China. And the way it was framed, both by the Chinese and the broader world, was that it is an equivalent, the Asian or Asian Pacific or Eurasian equivalent of a security organization. With China as its leader, but also Russia trying to match China in its leadership roles. And I can imagine this coalition, to take some role in, unsettling or settling regional orders in their respective region. I also assume that we could see something similar in Africa, around India, or South America. It's not great news for their United Nations-based security system. But at the same time, I think it's a good experience for the countries involved in terms of their understanding of what it takes and what it costs to take a proactive stance in providing for their own security. So even those countries who were traditionally seen by major powers as second-tier or even third-tier countries, they would now have a chance to build coalitions for broader missions to provide security in their respective continents. So it's an important learning moment for everyone on how exactly, to build a better and safer world. I also think that this kind of model is not sustainable in the long run. It will be just a response to the current crisis. But in the long run, there are tendencies underneath that tend to bring countries together. And what I mean is international trade in the first place. After all, many of these countries are connected. And putting the benefits of trade and development at stake is not in their best interest. Uh, but as a learning experience, this might lead to a new world. I don't know whether it's going to be better, but at least it would give some substance to the ideas of uh, responsibilities, like and fairness. If the Global South or anyone else wants to play a stronger role in the new security architecture, they need to realize what it means to take responsibility for their action. Because for the time being, I think there have there has been a lot of immaturity in how the system was run. While countries could express discontent with certain tendencies and conflicts, they would expect only the major powers to take action. Those who have nuclear weapons, those who enjoy the permanent seats on the Security Council. After this crisis, it will be up to these other members, perhaps members of the expanded Security Council, to be ready to take the tasks of ensuring security, to be able to send their troops on the ground wherever it takes, and to be able to defend their word, not just with a word, but also with a sword.
Michelle?
So when I think about this, I guess I have two answers. Both are probably not especially pragmatic or realistic, but my hope um, would be that we could have a kind of refounding moment of the international security order. So when the United Nations was created, there was this big meeting in San Francisco where all of these potential member states came and they talked about what this organization would be, and they came up with the structure, etc. And Ian Hurd has a wonderful book about how this had to do with this was a legitimacy building endeavor. And I think over the history of the United Nations system, it's lost a lot of legitimacy for various reasons. And so my dream would be that we could have a kind of refounding moment where we could think about what it means to provide for collective security in the current context. My second, even more far-fetched hope would be that we could have some kind of transformational leader that could imagine a different future. My understanding of the European Union is that Europe went through this horrible, horrible experience, and there were some really bold leaders who said, we cannot do this again. So how can we do this? And in very pragmatic ways, they set up a, European coal and steel community that over time has grown into this thing that we now know as the European Union. And if you think back to 1945, would it be imaginable that there would be essentially or effectively no border between France and Germany, right? But there is that today. And what would that mean? And those types of grand questions don't happen on an international scale. They happen regionally. And so I think there could be maybe some hope if we could think about how to transform international politics in a way that allows us to reimagine or to imagine new futures that don't look like the past. The question, of course, is what would be required to prompt such a thing. Yeah.
As far as my hope is concerned, I hope that the world will have learned something from this experience. And one of the lessons to be learned that it's not just about pragmatism. It's not just about commitment to sovereignty, territorial integrity, and everyone's security. What I hope the world will learn from the current predicament is an understanding that values also matter. And domestic regimes do play a role. After all, the war in Ukraine has a lot to do with the authoritarian nature of the Russian regime. And these kind of regimes tend to generate this type of threats to their neighbors and a wider world, so to say, because they are, so to say, constitutively connected to the idea of a threat and the other that they need to antagonize or protect their community from. Therefore, my hope is that when it comes to the moment of reconstitution, there will be a broader commitment to democracy on two levels. On the supranational level, I hope the members of the new organization would commit to a greater democracy as far as the decision-making process is concerned. But on the national level, I would also expect a stronger commitment to democratic values of the member states, and that they would take it on themselves to observe how genuine members' commitment to those values are. And I think this is what, in the long run, could ensure there is a stronger and genuine security for all.
Wow, it sounds like a perfect ending. Michelle, would you like to add
Oh,
something?
I just wanted to say I agree completely, and I think that on that front, what's happening inside the United States right now is not great, and the next year in particular will be really important to see how strong American institutions are, how strong the will of the American people are, how strong that commitment to democratic values is within the United States, because I fear for the global commitment to democracy if the United States itself is not committed to those values. And so I think American leadership on this front is really important, and it's in the hands in some ways of the American people to actually make that commitment to democracy loud and clear. So I think I will be sitting here for the next year hoping and working for the reinvigoration of democratic values inside the United States.
Well, when I hear this latest remarks from you, both from you, Michelle, and you, Evgeny, I feel like saying, let it be so, let it be so, let it be so. But I'm very happy that both of you have a clear vision, I would say, and also still have some hope, which is not so often to find these days. I also feel like we've had an amazing conversation, very analytical. I learned a lot. I'm sure everyone who watches this talk will also learn a lot. And it's also kind of a conversation which kind of makes you think further and further about, how can situation develop, what can appear, how structure should change, what can we wait, and it's also a very inspiring conversation. So thank you so much for it. Thank you for being with us. Thank you for dedicating a couple of hours of your life to this. And I wish you all the best in whatever you're doing, wherever you are. And I do hope we'll meet again in a few months for another conversation. And we'll get a chance to observe and talk about some more positive developments in comparison to the situation we have at the moment. So thank you so much. And to all our viewers, thank you for being with us. That was the 4th episode of the IGRec Talks on the global security infrastructure, where we speak with international scholars, researchers, political scientists, philosophers, sociologists, journalists, and we're trying to think and analyze the current situation to understand where we are now, but we're also trying to imagine a better future, a more secure future, and we're trying to understand what this new global security architecture might look like, not in the distant future, but maybe even tomorrow. Thank you. It was me, Angelina Davydova, with you for this almost 2 hours. And I look forward to your comments. If you enjoyed our conversation, please share it, please like it, and please send it along. And we'll be back with further conversations in about a couple of months. Thank you.